There's a sense of identity between the observed and the observer. For Eckhart, between the individual and God. He had a nice way of putting it. The eye wherein I see God is the same eye wherein God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one vision, one knowing, one love. Now, Carl Jung made a similar remark. I have references for all this stuff, but I won't refer to them now. But Jung's remark is quite similar. Man is the mirror which God holds up before him, or the sense organ with which he apprehends his being. The human consciousness is God's sense organ. Intriguing thought. So now for Eckhart, after the original flowing out, there is a flowing back into the Godhead. It's a homecoming, so as you'll note in that text, when I come home again, Eckhart said. This is not a new idea. Many of Eckhart's ideas are not new. Plotinus, 3rd century, he was the father of Neoplatonism, saw life as a process of returning the divided and differentiated ideas that constitute created reality back to their original place in the chain of emanation, which began with the One. So you can see the similarity with Eckhart's flowing out and flowing back. So for Eckhart, our destiny as conscious human beings, and note it's the same destiny for the universe, because the conscious person, Eckhart's words, takes all creatures out of their own into his own mind and makes them one. Their destiny is to be reabsorbed into the nothingness of the primordial One. Now, to be reabsorbed into nothingness is not really a prospect that you find advertised on TV today, but for Eckhart it was the highest delight. Eckhart says, the highest delight that is granted to the soul is to flow back again into the nothingness of its primordial image, and as the self, to be entirely lost there. So this notion of a return to an eternal unknown state was familiar and perhaps attractive to Dr. Jung. He felt it to be a characteristic of the archetype of the wise old man. He gave the example of Lao Tzu, whom he admired as a great philosopher. He was, Jung wrote, and you get the sense that he felt this way about himself, the example of a man with superior insight, who at the end of his life desires to return into his own being, into the eternal unknown meaning. Jung writes of a search for a myth of his own. He describes an event in 1925 in a game park near Nairobi. While gazing on massive herds of wildlife, he was overcome by a powerful numinous experience. He wrote, "The cosmic meaning of consciousness became overwhelmingly clear to me." He went on to say, "I had been looking about without a hope for a myth of my own, and now I knew what it was, and knew even more, that man is indispensable for the completion of creation, that he himself, in fact, is the second creator of the world, who alone has given to the world its objective existence. Human consciousness created objective existence and meaning, and man found his indispensable place in the great process of being." He expands on this a bit later, reflecting on the consciousness of a human being. Through consciousness, he takes possession of nature by recognising the existence of the world, and that's, as it were, confirming the Creator. Now you'll note the similarity with Eckhart's words, again in the text. "Truly it is I who bring all creatures out of their own into my mind and make them one in me." So note too Eckhart's understanding that he is a unifying agent. He makes all things one. Achieving oneness can be seen as synonymous with achieving wholeness. Now, wholeness, the finding of wholeness, is an important element in Jung's understanding of the meaning of life. Reality is a complex of opposites. Nothing new about this. Good, bad, hot, cold, up, down, passive, active, expansion, contraction, male, female, divine, human. Heraclitus taught us in the 5th century before the Common Era. Yin and Yang been a central feature of Chinese philosophy since at least the 3rd century BC. And even today, modern cosmologists tell us that the ongoing existence of our universe depends on a very delicate balance between the forces of matter and antimatter, or the forces of expansion and contraction that exploded into being with the Big Bang. Our own psyche, as you know, is a complex of opposites. We're all aware of competing drives and energy within us. The achievement of wholeness for Jung, which he calls the individuation process, involves the harmonisation of opposites, a balance of competing energies. The God image, which is experienced by the psyche, is also a complex of opposites. In his remarkable book, Answer to Job, Jung presents an amoral God being challenged by Job, and as a consequence, becoming conscious of his internal contradictions, becoming conscious that he is both just and unjust. Now, Jung sees in Job a model for how human consciousness can provide a service to God. The provision of such a service came to be for Jung an important life goal. So this relationship that Jung talks about, of sort of mutual independence of God and man, is hinted at in the famous painting of Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Here it's a shame I haven't got the slide, but you might remember that wonderful fresco that Michelangelo painted. So you have a God figure reaching out and then the male figure reaching the fingers, just touching. He wasn't politically correct, Michelangelo. He was quite a strong masculine gender bias there. But if you picture that, it's a marvellous picture. And it can be looked at as sort of a duality, I suppose. Divinity, humanity, touching. But it also can be perceived as a unity, as humanity and divinity being two halves of a composite unity. Jung's concept I mentioned earlier fits that picture very nicely if you think about it. Man is the mirror which God holds up before him, or the sense organ with which he apprehends his being. So the picture here is God, if you like, looking into a mirror to understand who he is. So we'll just go on to the next section on our little list here. It's called The Value of the Soul. Jung, when he discusses Eckhart's psychological conception of God, he referred to the sense of the value of his soul. So, I might have mentioned this earlier, I'll repeat it again. Jung says, strangely appealing is Eckhart's sense of inner affinity with God. We feel ourselves transported back into the spacious atmosphere of the Upanishads. Eckhart must have experienced a quite extraordinary enhancement of the value of the soul. That's his own inner being, that enabled him to rise to a purely psychological and relativistic conception of God and of his relation to man. This is Jung. Now, Eckhart himself is very cautious when talking about the soul. Eckhart says, he who wants to name the soul, such as it is in itself, in its simplicity, in its clarity, and its nakedness, will find no name for it. God, who is without name, he has no name, is ineffable. And the soul in its ground is likewise ineffable. Just as ineffable, that is, you can't speak about it, as he is. So rather than define the soul, Eckhart calls it a place. The soul is a place where God works compassion. So note for Eckhart that compassion is not pity. Compassio is better understood in its Latin sense, that is to feel with. So the soul for Eckhart is the place where God is united in experience with the human person. It's a place of personal relationship with God. He says, Eckhart says, the highest work of God is compassion. And this means that God sets the soul in the highest and purest place it can occupy, in space, in the sea, in a fathomless ocean, and there God works compassion. Therefore the prophet says, Lord, have compassion on the people who are in you. In other words, writes Eckhart, in some fashion we are in God, and such a being in is a land of compassion, of togetherness, of love, of non-dualism, of non-pity, of union. Now, Jung writes extensively about the soul. In Psychological Types, he's put out 8 pages on definition of the soul. And I struggle with them. Jung can be mentally exhausting. In the Red Book, on the other hand, he takes a different approach. He cries out, "My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you, are you there?" He's more interested in a relationship with the soul than an intellectual understanding of what it is. He recalled the time he resigned from the University of Zurich because scientific work was hindering him connecting with the spirit of the depths. Jung wrote, "I thought and spoke much of the soul. I turned her into a scientific object. I did not consider that my soul cannot be the object of my judgment and knowledge. Much more, my judgment and knowledge are the objects of my soul. The spirit of the depths forced me to speak to my soul, to call upon her as a living and self-existing being." So there's quite a litany of references to the soul in the Red Book. One that caught my attention was his experience of meeting with his soul. He writes, "The woman throws back her veil, and she is a beautiful maiden with ginger hair. She says to him, 'I am your soul.'" Now, there's another reason why that really caught my attention. About 60 years ago, I met a beautiful maiden with ginger hair. And she hasn't kicked me out yet, you know. Well, the hair is no longer ginger, and she's no longer a maiden, but she's still beautiful. Just turn now to God winks at our sins. This little quote from Eckhart caught Jung's attention. Jung uses this saying of Eckhart's as support for his contention that, quote Jung, "life itself flows from springs both clear and muddy. All excessive purity lacks vitality. Every renewal of life needs the muddy as well as the pure." What Eckhart said was, God is willing to bear the brunt of sins and often winks at them, mostly sending them to those whom he has destined for great things. In the Old Testament and New, he's shown this to be true of those who afterward were far the dearest to him. And still today, one seldom finds that people come to great things without they first go somewhat astray. So for anyone sweating under the spectre of a judgmental God, Eckhart's words would offer some relief. And I wonder how far Eckhart would take his God winks assurance. In referring to the Old Testament, Eckhart surely had King David in mind. As you know, King David did go somewhat astray. He fancied Bathsheba and arranged to have her husband killed. And he did come to great things as the king of the United Israel. Carl Jung himself was no saint, and he came to great things. So I think he quite liked what Eckhart had to say. To accept the muddy aspects of life is to be close to nature. Both Jung and Eckhart were close to nature. In his school years, Jung was aware of an aspect of himself, personality number 2, who was, I quote, close to nature, the earth, the sun, the moon, the weather, to all living creatures, and above all, close to the night, to dreams, and to whatever God worked directly in him. And to whatever God worked directly in him. In his later years, he again sought the solitude and simplicity of nature around his house in Bologna. Eckhart was deeply influenced by Celtic spirituality. His spirituality was the spirituality of the earth. God was to be found in the sky, the rivers, the trees, every kind of animal. Eckhart's advice to scholars was, let those who bring about wonders in big black books take an animal, perhaps a dog, to help them. Life within the animal will give them strength, for equality gives strength in all things. I just now turn to the motherly aspect of God and the birth of the divine child. Now, Jung saluted the world-embracing spirit of Meister Eckhart. Jung considered that medieval mysticism, which Eckhart embodied, involved a reversion to a more primitive connection with Mother Earth, the prime source of all power. And indeed, Eckhart speaks of the motherly aspect of God. Eckhart says, the maternity bed is in the Godhead. God lies like a woman on a maternity bed who has given birth in every good soul that has learned to let go. Eckhart stresses the importance of the birth of the divine child, the Son, in each soul. Eckhart says, God does this. He begets his only begotten Son in the highest part of the soul. At the same time, as he begets his only begotten Son in me, I beget him. Now, Jung, in the section of the Red Book entitled The Way of What Is to Come, Jung speaks of an inner child to be created in him. The human psyche will be the birthplace of a new God image. As he puts it in the Red Book, the spirit of the depths taught me that my life is encompassed by the divine child. From his hand, everything unexpected came to me, everything living. This child is what I feel as an eternally springing youth in me. And Jung declares his love for this yet to be born child, a divine child, as an expectant mother would. This is Jung's prayer. You find it in the Red Book. My God, I love you as the mother loves the unborn whom she carries in her heart. We need your light, O child. Since we go in darkness, lighten up our paths. May your light shine before us. May your fire warm the coldness of our life. Jung's prayer. This divine child will be the offspring of a heavenly wedding. Jung writes of the heavenly wedding in his book Answer to Job. Jung writes, the reappearance of Sophia points to the coming act of creation. She realises God's thoughts by clothing them in material form, which is the prerogative of all feminine beings. Her coexistence with Yahweh signifies the perpetual hieros gemos, heavenly wedding, from which worlds are begotten and reborn. A momentous change is imminent. God desires to regenerate himself in the mystery of the heavenly nuptials. Now, Jung had a vivid experience of the heavenly nuptials. He wrote, "They're the most tremendous things I'd ever experienced. They occurred when he was near death in 1944. He writes, I was in the Padres Rimenon, the garden of pomegranates, and the wedding at Tippereth and Malkuth was taking place. I cannot tell how wonderful it was. I do not know what part I played in it. At bottom, it was myself. I was the marriage. Then there came the last image. The Hieros Gamos heavenly wedding was being celebrated. The All-Father Zeus and Hera consummated the mystic marriage. There was a new, inexpressible sanctity in the room." Now, Jung understands Tippereth and Malkuth to be the male and female principles in the Godhead, according to the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is an esoteric understanding of Hebrew theology. Jung was heavily influenced by the Kabbalah. Actually, he wrote, "I only wish theologians would accept the Kabbalah so as to proclaim more clearly how God reveals himself." Well, Kabbalah and Jung, that's another story. Anyway, you'll recall the prayer of Jung to the divine child we just mentioned. "We need your light, our child." Jung hoped that this birth was imminent. He wrote, "The dogmatization of the Assumptio Mariae points to the heavenly wedding. And this in turn implies the future birth of the divine child." Now, Assumptio Mariae, it refers to the proclamation of the doctrine of the bodily assumption of Mary, the mother of Jesus, into heaven. The proclamation made by Pius XII in 1950 was, in Jung's view, the most important religious event since the Reformation. Jung was not alone in seeing a heavenly wedding symbolism in his doctrine. The Pope's proclamation specifically declared that, quote, "the place of the bride, whom the Father had espoused, was in the heavenly courts." So the divine child who is to come, as Jung imagines it, will not be the first divine child. The infant of Bethlehem, Yeshua bar Joseph, who became known as the Christ, was a God-man. But Jung sees the need for a new God image. Jesus as God is the sinless one. For Jung, he was not the typical empirical human being. There was no dark side. The new God image for Jung must contain all the opposites, including the good and the evil. The coming divine child, says Jung, will choose as his birthplace the empirical man. Birth of the new Christ child in empirical humanity, shadow side and all, brings about what Jung calls a Christification of many. Now Eckhart too, that's what's been noted, stresses the birth of the Son and the individual soul. But for Eckhart, this giving birth, it's not an event isolated in time. It's not a one-off. It's a continuous process occurring in each soul. He goes on to say, it makes no sense unless this birth occurs in him. And he cites Augustine. He says, St. Augustine says, what does it avail me if this birth of Christ, the Son in eternity, is always happening, if it doesn't happen in me? That it should happen in me is what matters. Therefore we shall speak of this birth, of how it takes place in us. I'll just now turn to a last little section, the way of letting go. Now, Eckhart called his realisation of identity with the Godhead a breakthrough, because it involved a radical letting go, a letting go of willing, of knowing and having, including letting go of any image of God that we might have. Any image of God that we have is bound to be inadequate. So, Eckhart prays, therefore we pray God to rid us of God. Now, Eckhart's way of letting go became important for Jung. In his commentary on the Golden Flower, where he was attempting to build a bridge of psychological understanding between the East and the West, He wrote about liberation experience in the East. He asked, what did these people do to achieve the development that liberated them? As far as I could see, they did nothing but let things happen. The art of letting things happen. Action through non-action. Letting go of oneself, as taught by Meister Eckhart, became for me the key opening the door to the way. We must be able to let things happen in the psyche. For us, this actually is an art of which few people know anything. Perhaps the most difficult, most stressful letting go for Jung was to do without meaning. To have my joy of explaining taken away. He appreciated the need for the word which has only one meaning, so that you escape boundless ambiguity. But he felt he must obey the urge towards forbidden knowledge. He felt called to wait without knowing what for. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, is it? To wait without knowing what for. How long am I supposed to wait? What should I be doing about it in the meantime? And I wonder what advice Meister Eckhart might have had for Dr. Jung. I feel sure Meister Eckhart would have both liked and admired Carl Jung. They were both spiritual revolutionaries. They both experienced rejection. I think the Meister would emphasise the totality of letting go. I think he would remind him of his own personality too, who was mentioned a little earlier, was close to whatever God worked directly in him. So his advice might be, the more you can be totally detached from personal achievement, the more you will be open to use your own words to whatever God wishes to work directly in you. Now, over the last several months, I've become acquainted, if only in an introductory way, with Meister Eckhart. It's been a journey of new insights and spiritual growth. Dr. Jung has been and continues to be for me an important visionary, and I find in both of them a breath of life. And I suppose I might add a sense of relief. I've gone too long, and I thank you for your patience.